It's time to change your world. It's time to let it go. The things you used to think, the things you used to know, they don't help you anymore. It's time to change your mind. If it's peace you want to find.
This is Kurt Kaikonen, pastor of Calvary Chapel, Waterford, at your neighborhood church. Today on Change Your World, we'll be in the book of 1st and 2nd Samuel. So grab your Bible and let's get started.
It's time to change your world. You need to let it go. Oh, oh.
And so now, all the way up to chapter 11, although we saw that David, he had many trials, he only had victories, where God empowered David to establish the kingdom of Israel. But now, after David's sin, David's life takes a turn, where now this is the dark days of David. And we're told that Absalom has a lovely sister, Tamar. And Tamar is Absalom's full sister, where they both share the same beautiful mother, the princess Ma'acha, daughter of King Talmai from Geshur. And both of her children are beautiful. And so Absalom and Tamar, they have royal blood in them from both sides of their family. And that may be partly the reason and the cause for Absalom's ego and pride problem. But Amnon, he was the firstborn. So Amnon was the crown prince. He was the one in the natural order to be the heir of David's throne. He's to be the next king of Israel. Where Absalom, he was the third born. But the second born, Chileab, if you remember, there was Chileab from Abigail, he's never mentioned again. And so it's believed that he died at a young age, meaning that after Amnon, Absalom is the next in line. And Ammon and Absalom, if you remember, they were both born in Hebron. And so it's believed that Ammon is about 21 years old at this time. And so that would mean that Absalom's a little younger, and Tamar, she might be an older teenager. And Tamar, she's a virgin. And she wears the clothes of one of the king's virgin daughters. So she wears this robe called a robe of many colors, which means that she's a daughter of the king and she's available for marriage. But she's not available to Ammon because she's his half-sister. Though they do have different mothers, but according to the law, a half-sister is a sister because it's incest. But Ammon, he doesn't see it that way, because he has this unnatural lust for his sister Tamar. And this is the same sister he grew up with, Absalom's full sister. So you can imagine these kids were running around in diapers together. And Ammon, he knows it's wrong, and he knows it's perverted, and there's nothing he can do about it because Tamar is unavailable to him. So he really should just move on. But he doesn't, because his lust for her was great. And the way he played with that lust in his mind where it actually caused him to become physically ill, where we would call that being lovesick, where he doesn't eat, but there is absolutely no love at all in this. This is just unbridled lust. And Amnon, he has another problem because Amnon has no access to Tamar. Because all the king's virgin daughters who are available for marriage, they're all kept secluded. They're protected. Where the virgin princesses, they all have their own quarters, kept away from even their own male relatives. And so up until now, at least Amnon has kept his perverted desires all to himself until his cousin Jonadab shows up. And nobody needs a cousin like Jonadab. And you should never make this kind of guy your friend. Where the Bible calls him very crafty, where that word literally means wise, but it's meaning it in a bad way. And Jonadab, he notices that Amnon's getting thinner by the day. And Jonadab, he seems to be the kind of guy who's trying to get himself ahead, where he wants to get in good with the next king. And Amnon, he's going to be the next king. So it seems here, Jonadab's trying to get in good with Ammon. And so he prods Amnon and he says, tell me why you're all upset, why you're sick. You can tell me anything. I won't tell anyone. So Ammon confesses his wrongful feelings of what he calls love for his sister Tamar, where Amnon says, I love Tamar, my brother Absalom's sister. But you can see here that Amnon, he's playing games in his mind because he doesn't call Tamar his sister, but he calls her Absalom's sister. But he calls Absalom here his brother. So clearly, she's his sister. And so Amnon, he's twisting his reality to be able to justify his feelings of perversity toward Tamar. And because of his lust, Amnon, he deceives himself and he calls his lust love. But this isn't love. This isn't love in any form. He doesn't care anything about what Tamar thinks or how she feels. He doesn't care anything about her person. And Jonadab, hearing Amnon's confession, he should have counseled Amnon to let go of this idea of being with Tamar. And Jonadab here, he should have really been considering Tamar. But instead, he figures a way for Amnon to get Tamar alone. And even though Jonadab doesn't come right out and say it, then go force yourself on Tamar. But some commentators, they say that he might as well have said it. But we really can't call Jonadab a co-conspirator to the rape because he may not have known what Amnon's intentions were when Ammon did get Tamar alone. But there are a lot of friendships in the world that are built on common perverseness, where they're partners in filth, they're conspirators of evils. And we see that all the time, that there are people like that. And so the plan of Jonadab was for Ammon to pretend to be sick, for Amnon to go ask David to have Tamar come to his house and to cook some cakes for him. So skinny little wimpy Amnon, he must have started to feel a lot better because it says Amnon pretended to be sick when his father David came to see him. And Amnon's behavior is totally childish, where he's acting like this overindulged child, refusing to eat unless he can have it his way. I'll eat, Daddy, if Tamar makes my food. But Tamar, she's not a cook. What's wrong with Helga making his food? Helga, she's a good cook. Or Aunt Jemima, she makes great pancakes. Why can't she make your pancakes? Tamar is just a teenage girl and she's a princess. She doesn't cook for anyone. But David, he has lost all his discernment regarding his family, where after this incident with Bathsheba, he lost all of his authority in the home. And so he caters to his overprivileged firstborn son. And so David, he orders his daughter Tamar to go make cakes for Ammon so he can eat them out of her hand because he doesn't have enough strength to feed himself. And so you have to see here that David, he is the greatest example we have of a worshiper of God and how to be a person after God's own heart. But David, he is also our best example of how not to raise your children, because David is a horrible father. He loves his kids, but he doesn't teach them. He doesn't discipline them. And with having so many children from so many wives, it's always chaos. And so he totally removes himself from parenting. And he's allowing his many wives to raise his children as they see fit. And so it's really hard for me to kind of picture and imagine this, how David's dinner table would look, because you have all these wives and you have all these kids and all this chaos, and it's day after day. I wouldn't be able to keep everybody's names straight. And the closest thing that I compare David to here is being like a workaholic father who's always away, where everything else seems to be more important than the family. And these are those kind of people who say that children, they only need quality time and not quantity of time, making excuses for not being there and for not spending time with their kids. But there is no such thing as quality time without a quantity of time. So you can't raise children without spending personal time with them. And children, they can't raise themselves. But it seems like David, this is how he dealt with his guilt for not being a present father. Because he's not a present father, he becomes an indulgent father by being soft and easy on him. So David, he's the buddy father. And so David orders Tamar to Amnon's home to go make cakes. So Tamar, she goes and she makes the cakes. And Amnon, he refuses to eat the cakes because everything Amnon said to David was a lie. This was all a plot to commit rape. And then Amnon, he orders all the servants out, the ones who should have been making his cakes. And then Amnon tells his sister to bring the pancakes into the bedroom. And so I can eat from your hand like a baby because I don't have enough strength to feed myself. And so she walks into the room, and Amnon, he's laying on his bed, and he doesn't even eat one cake. He just grabs her, and he doesn't even try to hide his perverted desires, and he doesn't call her by name, but he says, "Lie with me, my sister." And here he calls Tamar his sister, and he doesn't care if she's repulsed by him. And Tamar, she fights back. And Amnon, he's not physically weak at all. And as she fights, she argues with him. And she gives Amnon 3 reasons why not to do this. And the first thing she does is she calls him brother. And she says, "No, my brother, don't force me. Don't rape me. These things are not to be done in Israel." So this is against the law. And that's in Deuteronomy 22:25 through 29. And then she tells Amnon, "Stop, think of me. Where can I go? Where could I take my shame? Meaning, if you do this to me, you will destroy my life because nobody will marry me. Because in this culture, even though she's the daughter of a king, no one would marry her knowing she's been violated." And then she gives Amnon a 3rd reason. She says, "Think about yourself. You're going to be the king. And you're throwing it all away because you're going to be considered a fool and you will lose the throne." And then she pleads with Amnon to do this the right way, to marry her, that she would become his wife. "Just ask the king. He won't refuse you." And this appeal was probably only made to try to stop Amnon from raping her, where Tamar is doing everything in her power, where she's willing to say anything to stop him, because she doesn't want to marry Amnon, and she doesn't believe David would give her to Amnon anyways, because he wouldn't violate the law. She's just desperate. She's willing to say anything. But Amnon, he doesn't listen to a word she says because he's already committed this act over and over again in his mind, and he wasn't going to be stopped. He's already given himself over to the rape. And then after the act, what follows is always what follows. After being tempted to commit this act of sin, the act of sin never delivers what it promises to the sinner. It never leaves them satisfied, but it leaves the violator empty, like they've just woken up from a bad dream, where you sit there and you're immediately ashamed and embarrassed. And now this one who you said you loved, you now blame. And you blame them for your actions as if it's their fault for the way you acted. And you blame them for your dissatisfaction. You made me do this to you. It's your fault. You made me feel the way I felt. Never taking responsibility for their actions, blaming the victim for their sins. And you see this not only in rapes, but you see it in domestic violence, and you also see this in child abuse. You made me hit you. But now that the deed was done, Tamar, she was only just a reminder of what he did to her. So now he hated her. And it says he hated her exceedingly, where it says, so that the hatred with which he hated her was greater than the love with which he had loved her. And for me, this is really easy to believe because he never loved her. Where sometimes in a relationship, there can be this combination of love and lust, but not here. This was all lust. Amnon never cared one thing about what Tamar ever felt. She pleaded with him about what she felt. She was just something for him to use. And girls, they need to know that there's a lot of men like that in the world. And so now Amnon says, Tamar, get out, arise, be gone. And Tamar here, she's done nothing wrong. She's only been abused, or she's just been raped with her virginity stolen from her. And now she has no place to go because she can no longer live in the apartments with the other virgin daughters of the king, because now she's damaged goods, where she no longer is a prospect for marriage with anyone. And so she says to Ammon, when he commanded her to leave, she says, no, indeed, this evil of sending me away is worse than the other that you did. And what I believe Tamar is referring to here is Deuteronomy chapter 22:28, where it says, if a man finds a young woman who is a virgin, who is not betrothed, and he seizes her and lies with her, and they are found out, then the man who lay with her shall give to the young woman's father 50 shekels of silver, and she shall be his wife, because he humbled her. He shall not be permitted to divorce her all his days. So here, because of this law, Amnon, he could redeem himself because he could pay the bride's price to make Tamar his wife. And here it seems that Tamar is saying that even with Ammon being her half-brother, that she is willing to become his wife because of what he did to her. And I believe that Ammon understands exactly what Tamar is saying here. But Ammon, he no longer wants her as a wife. He would rather just hate her now. And so now we have the servants, and they're dragging Tamar out, and they're bolting the door behind her, where Ammon is saying, put this woman out, where he doesn't call her Tamar, and he doesn't call her his sister. Now he just calls her this woman. And Tamar, she doesn't hide this terrible crime that's been committed against her. She's not buying into the idea that any of this was her fault, because it's not. And so she leaves and she puts ashes on her head. And it's probably the same ashes from the wood of the fire that cooked Ammon's cakes. And then she tears her royal robes of many colors that's only worn by the king's virgin daughters, stating in no uncertain terms that I did not consent to what happened to me today. I was raped. And then she's walking like this, and she's crying and she's wailing until she's found by her brother Absalom, where she can't hide she's been a victim of rape because she's disheveled with her robes torn and blackened from the ash. And Tamar, she doesn't tell Absalom that her brother Ammon raped her. Absalom asks Tamar the obvious, and he says, has Ammon, your brother, been with you? Where Ammon, he may have thought that this would have been kept secret, but Absalom's counsel to his sister here is to keep her peace. Do not take this thing to heart. And I don't think rape victims can do that very well. But Absalom, he's doing his best to comfort his sister and to let her know that this is not her fault. This is Ammon's fault. And when Absalom says to Tamar, he is your brother, what he's saying here is he's saying, if this was some other man, I would avenge you right away. But because this is your brother, I'll have to wait for opportunity to avoid a public scandal. And you need to realize that this is going to get messy because Ammon is the crowned prince. And Absalom, he's the next in line for the throne after Amnon. So now Tamar, with nowhere to go, she goes to live with her brother Absalom in his house, where we're told she remained desolate. And that means that she remained unmarried, all alone. And then finally, King David, he hears about all this. And maybe that's when Tamar didn't come home. And we don't know how he found out. But when he did find out, we see that David, he gets angry. And it even says he gets very angry. And everybody's waiting to see what he's going to do. But he does absolutely nothing. He's not even going to rebuke Amnon. And Amnon, he's still the crowned prince to one day inherit the throne of David. But there were remedies that David could have taken and that he should have taken, because he is the one who's supposed to be Tamar's avenger. But most people believe that this is because of David's own consciousness of his own guilt, which gave him a lack of moral authority in his home, because he himself, he's taken a woman he shouldn't have taken. He took Bathsheba, another man's wife, and he deserved death for his act. So how can he say anything to Amnon for doing the same thing? And David, he committed 2 capital crimes that deserved death, and he got away with both of them. So, Amnon, maybe he's supposed to get away with this. So how can he say anything to Amnon, where David is thinking that he acted in the same kind of character? So he can't say nothing. He has nothing to say, or at least he feels he doesn't. And this is where we need to take a warning as Christian parents, where we can't raise our kids by not correcting them by God's word. No matter how badly you have failed personally, even if you failed in the same areas that your kids are failing in, you can't justify their sins by saying, well, I did those kind of things when I was their age, where I slept with my boyfriend or my girlfriend, saying things like, kids will do what kids will do, or things, not just with sex things, but things like drinking or like drugs. Well, kids they're gonna experiment. I did that. They'll grow out of it. It's just a phase they're going through. I did. And maybe they'll grow out of it. And maybe they'll come to their senses. Or else maybe they'll be drug addicts and alcoholics, because that happens a lot too. You have to raise your kids by the word of God, not by your past failures. If you want them to turn out and to live like Christians, you need to teach them. You need to save them, because this world is full of trouble. You should even try to correct your adult kids to not do what David did here, to do nothing, because he didn't do anything. This is going to end up causing a lot of people a lot of pain. But for a while, it seems like it's the easier thing to do. That it's easier to do nothing. It's easier just to be non-confrontational. But here you have a victim, and here you have a brother, and they're both watching. They're both wanting to be avenged by a father who should be the one to avenge them. Because you have to see here, Amnon, he gets away with it. And so now they're sitting around, and all they can do is stew over it. And Absalom does this without saying a word. He's just waiting to see what will happen. And he's going to have 2 years of waiting where this bitterness and this hatred will grow. It's not only going to grow for Amnon, but his hatred and his bitterness is going to grow toward David for not doing anything.
You need to change your world. You need to let it go. Oh.
Thanks for listening to Change Your World. Change Your World is an outreach of Calvary Chapel, Waterford, and your neighborhood church. If you're listening to Change Your World in the Detroit metro area, why don't you join us for church this Sunday? Our service time is 10 a.m. at Calvary Chapel, Waterford, 183 South Winding Drive, Waterford, Michigan. We're competing with the Catholics. It's only an hour. All the donuts you can eat, and you don't have to believe a thing we say, but it could change your world.
You need to change your world.
The rest of today's message can be heard at yourneighborhoodchurch.org. So check us out and download the app. And until next week, remember,